Welcome everybody to our sixth brown bag. We are very excited to have our Associate Professor of Special Ed, Yvel Crevecoeur, teach us, and I'm going to let him get the show started. So thanks everybody, and keep your questions till afterwards, and then we'll be sure to answer them. So take it away, Yvel.
All right, thank you. All right, so here we go. So what while you read or look at the first slide page, I just want to share with you that the overarching goal for me for this presentation and discussion with you is to talk about areas in the design of in-person / online blended courses or hybrid instructional mode that does not seem to get as much attention as does the use of technology. What I'm going to focus on in terms of the underlying goal for this presentation and interaction is how do we align what we do within, whether it's in person versus an online course, class format, whether it's synchronous or asynchronous. And essentially, how do we transition from in-person for 1 week to online being either synchronous or asynchronous another week, and how to go back and forth seamlessly. So on this first page, you'll see there's a picture of wooden desks and also a picture of a laptop, representing online. What we like at the School of Education, or tend to, I would assume that most of us like, would be tables as opposed to individual desks, to have students interact with each other in small collaborative groups and to even work independently when needed. Oops, there we go. So here's the agenda. So on the next page, which is slide number 3, once I leave this slide, you're going to see 2 pictures. I just want you to look at them, to think about them, and to try and figure out what the missing word is. The missing word on the next page is represented by individual letter dashes to help you figure it out. At the end of the presentation, I want to talk with you about how we can also incorporate that type of instructional design within a hybrid course. We'll first start off by pairing up with a partner and with you discussing with your partner, what is a hybrid classroom? And then to extend that discussion into what is a classroom. So first start off with either what is a hybrid classroom, and then finish off or start off with what is a classroom. Then we'll come back and reconvene, and then we'll start with number 3. So I'll talk to you about how you can utilize office hours in a different way using the hybrid format, the types of learners that we need to focus on when you're engaging in an online environment. Then we'll get into what are some of the assumptions that we have for before a class, during a class, and after a class, whether it's in person or online. We'll wrap it up with a group activity where I'll provide you access to a template that I have and you tell me or tell us as a group, what would you do in terms of the course alignment for your in-person transition to online, transition back to in-person, and so on and so forth. And then I'll close it with some takeaways to help you conceptualize what I'm trying to impart during this presentation. So here's the picture, or the pictures. There are 2 pictures. At the end of the presentation, I'll show these pictures again. So just look at them use whatever information you can get from it, and think about it. And as I present, I want you to answer this question. How might the blank classroom come into play? So you need to try and figure out how we can incorporate a different type of format within a hybrid learning environment. All right, we move on to the next slide. All right, what is a classroom, or what is a hybrid classroom? So I'm going to stop sharing for a little bit. Let me see how many people we have here.
Yvel, I have to leave.
Oh, okay.
I mentioned that earlier, but I'll pick up the video.
Okay. All right, sounds good.
Thank
All
you.
right, so I'm gonna put you
Bye-bye.
into 1, 2, 3. Let's say, okay, it might be more than pairs. It might be small groups. So here we go. Let me stop sharing and get into it. So again, when you get into your groups, you're going to talk to each other about what is a classroom and what is a hybrid classroom. Just talk to each other about that. What does it represent to you? Or how do you define it?
I'm pausing.
Continued, Henny.
We're not seeing, oh, there we go. You're muted, Yvel.
Okay, so here we are, we're back together, and we are going to have at least one person from each group share with us what is a classroom and what is a hybrid classroom. You can start with either one. Who would like to start first?
Yeah, let me go first. The group that I was in was had Laura Gillert and Randy Bros and myself. And we started by looking at what is a classroom. And I think Laura mentioned that to her perception of a classroom is a community. And so we went into a community of learners, and so it's a group of learners. It could be limitless without a space, you know, so not confined to a space, but a group of people just learning. And then when we got to the hybrid classroom, that's when we kind of had a little more restrictive view. Well, it's a hybrid classroom, so we're talking now about space. So we're talking about a defined space, perhaps like a classroom, and then a defined space, and then a modality like online. And then, but also hybrid could mean more than one thing. It could mean asynchronous and synchronous, because hybrid just means a combination of two different things. And so it's not necessary that hybrid would be both a physical classroom and an online. It could also be asynchronous and synchronous. All right. Let me allow Lara or Randy to share what they think to add on to what I just said.
You covered a lot of what we talked about. I mean, we also try to get away from our thinking of online with hybrid classroom. Because we're a school of ed, we mentioned that a hybrid classroom could be a group of learners in the field,
Right.
you know, and what we would say schools or other outside learning experiences or in the bricks and mortars of a classroom. That's another thing that was mentioned. One of the things that I just wanted to mention is that I found it really interesting how the way we answered the two questions was very different. And we started with what is a classroom and then went to the hybrid, and it was interesting how our thinking changed. So.
All right, thank you. How about the next group?
Who's the next group?
And
For our group, it was Martin, Chi, and Doris. And very similar to what Dr. Lewis said, a classroom is anywhere where teaching and learning occurs, and a hybrid looks at like multiple spaces where that happens in one course. I mentioned field trips being part of a hybrid experience, and then we talked about different sort of platforms or ways of structuring a hybrid classroom.
okay, all right, thank you. And then our third group or pair.
Yeah. Henny and I were together. So that's always a little dangerous when two of us get together. Delightful also. But I think certainly we were thinking in terms of the same issues that you've just described, and also talking about the challenge of the adjustment for us as instructors and for the students. And in particular, the talking about being online and in person, the issues of just stamina of teachers who work all day and then have to come to the college and then have to get home on a subprime version of the New York City subway system. I think it's a lot of challenge. On the other hand, we didn't quite get to this, but I think we were going toward it. There's great value and vitality in being together. I did one first class online because I thought it would just be easier to find for everybody to find each other. And then last week I taught in person. So it was the first time I was teaching in person. And there was just a lot of energy and happiness at being together. I was very anxious ahead of time, and that went away when we were actually there in the room. And so now we're faced with adjusting and thinking about how to use what's strong that we developed during the pandemic, during online teaching, and how to integrate it.
All right, thank you.
Henny, you want to add anything?
You're
muted, Henny.
Most likely you covered a lot of that, what we discussed, and it is a whole new beginning for a lot of our students that like for the when they do come back and when we really have the hybrid, they've been so used to be online for 2 years now, and just to make this kind of adjustment might take a while just to get used to it on that, because it's really in the sense of seeing a person really next to 3 feet next to you compared to just being on the screen on that. Okay, on that. All right. Okay, Yvel.
all right. Thank you, Henny. Thank you, everyone. What I want you to leave with these two questions: what is a hybrid classroom? What is a classroom? Is less about the physical space and more about what you do within an environment, whether it's virtual or within a physical space. And in terms of the vitality or the engagement, what I've learned is that the more students that have their cameras on, the more engaged they are. So what you experience in a in-person on face-to-face classroom can be more easily replicated online if they use their cameras. Unfortunately, they I don't force them to use their cameras, and it kind of takes away from that environment. But as I go through this presentation, I also want you to think about and say to yourself, or I'm saying to you, that whether it's hybrid or whether it's in person, that both environments are a community of learners. So let's continue and see how that comes into play. So that's us describing what hybrid and in-person is. Different organizations have their own descriptions. So here are the descriptions for CUNY in terms of mode of instruction. So for in-person, they say no course assignments and no required activities delivered online. May include class sessions at academic or professional events. Web Enhance, no scheduled class meetings are replaced, but some of the course content and assignments, as well as required or optional activities, are online. So that's some. Partially online would be up to 32% of the scheduled classes are replaced with online activities or virtual meetings. Now here's hybrid. Between 33% and 80% of the scheduled class meetings are replaced with online activities or virtual meetings. Online, more than 80%, but less than 100%. Now, this is fully online. 100% of the scheduled class meetings are replaced with online activities or virtual meetings. All of the class work, including exams, is online. Now, let's pay particular attention to fully online with the last sentence. All of the class work, including exams, is online. So now I want you to look at these two. In-person and hybrid. What do you pick up from how CUNY defines these two types of instructional modes? Laura.
I don't think anybody does in person anymore.
Well, let's pretend we're not in the pandemic.
No, I meant where no course assignments and no required activities are delivered online.
Ah, okay. All right. Now I see where
Right?
you're going. Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, we are so in Blackboard now that students are using Blackboard for course assignments, and we might be, we might be using technology for certain activities. And even though we're face-to-face in the classroom, we have, I mean, I've been using Blackboard for assignments.
Yeah.
For
Me too. So,
way before the pandemic.
well, I actually never used Blackboard before the pandemic, and it has literally taken me 2 years to get up to speed. And I still check the how to do this on Blackboard, but now we meet in person, and yes, we're going to do, art making and project making together, but the assignments and everything get handed in on Blackboard. We email consistently, and I don't know, it would just seem very simple to, if we had to all of a sudden switch on a dime to go from one modality to the other, which before, I'm not so sure it was easy for us to do.
Now I'm highlighting these two descriptions that CUNY indicated in a memo to say this, that when you design your hybrid course, feel comfortable to include what might be considered your strengths in person first, and slowly build your strengths or your competency with online as you move forward. So for example, if you're not yet familiar with online assessments in Blackboard, there's no reason why in your hybrid course you couldn't design your course schedule for the semester to have all quizzes and exams to be in person on campus. And as you become more familiar with the features in Blackboard, you can slowly start transitioning more of your course to the online environment. So let's continue talking about hybrid and in person. So, how do we move to and from in-person and online environments? So typically we think, or let me speak for myself. I think that before class, all of my students are studying like this gentleman is doing right here. But that may not be the case in all in all circumstances. Then they come to class prepared, they've read, and hopefully when I'm in class, I'm not boring them to death. So during class, it's supposed to be engaging, interacting with the student to student, instructor to student, etc. As they leave class and go to, and they start to take what they learn from that class session, hopefully that never happens, that they don't experience some type of barrier and frustration when they're working independently. That whatever we did before class and during class actually supported them for more additional independent work after class. Here's how I conceptualize a hybrid course. And think about that picture on the second slide, because some of that is embedded in here. So before class, there's an opportunity to interact with me, or even with some of their classmates. There are things or tasks that they need to do in preparation for the next class session. Anything that they might need to read, websites that they might need to review, tasks or forms or documents that they have to fill out for paired, individual, or even small group activities. Then during class, whether it is an online class or an in-person class, there's opportunities for discussion in whole and small group settings within the classroom environment, whether it's virtual or in person. There is small group interactions among the student themselves, where they're working on something to accomplish a certain goal or a task. And there's also a reconvening, where we reconvene, all the small groups reconvene and we share and talk about what we've done. And what I tend to do is when they're in this small group, for example, let's say there are 5 small groups. All 5 groups do not do the same task or the activity, but they do parts of a whole. So when we do reconvene, each group is putting the pieces of the puzzle together to paint the picture that we're trying to paint for that class session. Then after class, whether in person or virtual, there's additional opportunities for them to continue working with their classmates in one-on-one with myself or in pairs. And what that also ends up being is another opportunity in preparation for the next class. So it's a recursive cycle that before a class, they're preparing for the class at hand. They go to the class session, engage in the content, engage with their classmates and the instructor. And after class is an extension of that classroom environment and preparation for the next class session. So what about office hours? It depends on how you set up your format for the semester. You can decide to do one in-person to every, you can decide to do one in-person, one online, one in-person, one online. You can decide to do one in-person, 2 online, one in-person, 2 online. You can decide to do 2 in-person class sessions, 1 online session, then 2 in-person class sessions, then 1 online session. If you are beginning to experience and design a hybrid course, I would suggest that you, percentage-wise, have more of your class sessions in person to begin understanding what works best for you and what you want to teach and how you want to teach the content and what lends itself more at that point in time to the online environment. Eventually, the goal is for you to feel equally comfortable designing a class session for online or in person as you learn the features in Blackboard and other apps and activities that you can do in an online environment. So I don't know about you, but this is what I've experienced in a traditional class when they come to office hours that are held outside of the class session. I tend to provide clarification. The clarification is usually to the shy students or students who are unsure, who don't want to let other students know they don't really, they're not as confident in the content. When they do come, I find myself reviewing the lecture content that I already believe that I taught, but in reality, if they're seeing me about the content that I thought I taught, I really didn't teach it. I delivered the content, and some students learned it, so therefore I taught it to them. And others, I didn't teach them because that's why they're in my office hours session. So this tends to be more at the surface level because there isn't much time for us to get in as deep as I did in the class. And I found that those office hours sessions, when we are meeting face-to-face in the old school or traditional way of looking at face-to-face classes, that tended to be at the remembering, understanding, and the apply levels for Bloom's taxonomy. With the move, or how I try to set up my hybrid classes, there's more opportunities for me to address the connections in the classroom. So more opportunities for me to talk about before class, this is what you need to do. During class, here's what we are going to do. And here are the things that we are doing, and we are doing it together. So there's more interaction between students, what I've designed or how I've designed my courses. There is more interaction between the students and themselves and between the students and myself, because a lot of the work, independent work, is also done outside of the class in preparation for class. So in class group work with the connection to the individual field-based applications, their timesheets, the hours that they need to complete in the schools, and their reflection assignments. It moves beyond surface level to where they must apply skills that are being taught and modeled in the class in their small groups, and then will need to share it to the rest of the class with me providing immediate corrective feedback if they go astray anywhere. So then I find myself seeing the class shifting sooner to higher levels in Bloom's taxonomy, to where they are more at the levels where they are analyzing and evaluating themselves and each other within a group when they work with each other, and then also analyzing and evaluating other groups. And then we are co-creating. So we are co-creating together, where the end product is a refined product. So typically what I've seen is that we have these large semester-long projects, and they're working on these projects, and you end up grading the projects at the end of the semester. But if they don't come and see you and you don't work with them more often, those are not the refined products that they could have been. So what I try to do in these new designs of hybrid courses that I teach is that I try to embed the semester-long project knowledge and skills within the class session. So they are practicing it and getting feedback on it and brainstorming with their classmates on the project itself, and then they can apply that to their independent work. Now, when it comes to the classroom itself, I conceptualize it into 3 different distinct but flexible groups. So whether it's an in-person class session or a virtual class session, if it's either synchronous or asynchronous, the design or the tasks, the goals, the objectives of each class session, the primary goal is to reach no less than 80%. I would love to reach 100%, but that's not a guarantee. So the goal is to try and reach at least 80% of the students. Then for a smaller percentage, 15% of the class, I would assume, might be for a small group. They might need additional supports. Now, here is where the individualized systems comes into play. I can either work with them individually as I rotate from one small group to another before they present, but sometimes there's not enough time for me to individually provide support to that student. Therefore, the asynchronous class session that might be the following week, or even my office hours that week, the student can meet with me and I can work with the student individually during my office hours that week, or hold a conferencing session during an asynchronous hybrid class session the following week. And I have a template that I will share with you, and you will see that I articulate these three groups as typical learners will be the 80%. Then I'll have struggling learners that will comprise the remaining 20%. But there's one additional group that's not necessarily, that isn't reflected here. And that would be the advanced learners. So let's just say, for example, you have a course that is addressing the initial skills in your particular area, whether it's mathematics or TESOL bilingual or special ed, the initial skills. But you might have a teacher who is already certified, who is adding a new certification, but by the time they finish the program, they still need to demonstrate the initial skills in the new area. Even though they're learning the initial skills for the new endorsement area for certification, they are technically more of an advanced learner in your class than someone who is pursuing certification for the first time. So you need to also have something in play for them to engage with as advanced learners in your classroom. So here's before, during, and after. So the traditional in-person mode only. Students must independently review materials, read, etc., to build prior knowledge. They read the chapter before they have class. They come to class, or as the instructor, you prepare, you update your materials for that class session. Then during class, they listen to the lecture, they take notes, they participate in discussions and activities. You observe how they're responding to your instruction, to your work that you had planned, and then you make any type of adjustments that need to be made. Then after class, they independently work or do homework or some type of extension activity, can work with a partner, small group, etc. And you, at times, can also provide delayed feedback to the student. Now, in a hybrid mode, which is including both synchronous and asynchronous, the plan in your design is to provide them access, but provide them access to the content in a progressive and systematic way. So your lectures and your materials build on each other, they overlap and engage them in terms of interaction. So the key that I've experienced is that to make your course more successful is to figure out ways to make it more engaging to the student. And one of the ways you make it more engaging to the student is by knowing who you have in your classroom. So having a plan for the typical learners, having a plan for the struggling learners, having a plan for the advanced learners, because an advanced task or activity is engaging to an advanced learner. A task or activity that is designed for a struggling learner is not engaging to a student who is an advanced learner. I mean, these are all things that we know, but I'm just trying to conceptualize them in a way so to put it together for your design of your hybrid courses. So the instructor aligns before, during, and after class materials and activities. So now, instead of just planning for that one class session, you're planning for the upcoming class session and the one after it, because you want to make sure that those two class sessions have links. Because before class, you need to have a link to the class, and after class, you need to have a link to that class that was taught, and then links to the upcoming class. When it comes to during class sessions, now the students are applying their pre-developed knowledge from before class tasks. There's a danger here. The danger is including material in a way that might give the students misconceptions. So when it comes to before class, as you're learning to design your hybrid courses or making them more sophisticated, think about less is more for before class. And as you understand how they respond to the independent work before class, then you can get more sophisticated. Now the instructor is more a facilitator and a guide, because your during class session gives you more of an opportunity to have the students actually demonstrate skills. So before class, you're developing background knowledge. During class, you're extending that before class background knowledge development and checking for understanding to make sure that everyone is on the same page. But when you have them go work in pairs, in small groups, independently, and give them an opportunity to demonstrate the skills, that gives you another opportunity to provide corrective feedback that they can take and use in their independent work after the class. Now, office hours now are also included during the asynchronous class sessions. So this is an additional opportunity for you to give feedback to them, or an opportunity for them to say to you, I've been working on my semester-long project. Can you answer some questions that I have? You meet with them, they share their screen, they show you what they've been writing, and you can then immediately correct any type of misconception and reinforce what they're doing well and how they're grasping the information in the course. Then after class is a continuation of the engagement. So even if you don't meet with them on campus, you are still engaging with them, whether it's with you or with their classmates. They can set up times to meet with their small group and invite you to the online session to work with them in their small group session during class time the following week. And the key here for this last bullet or last dash is what it says: embeds conceptual links to the next class session. And this is related to the next slide. So at this point, the way I'm trying to conceptualize my hybrid courses is that there is almost no distinction between in-person and online. What they can do in person, I try to set it up in a way that they can also do it in the online environment as well. What we must remember, and it's hard to do, is that not all the students perform equally well because they don't have the same knowledge and skills. So therefore, while you have to have a plan in place for a struggling, for a typical learner, and for an advanced learner in your class. So this slide and the next slide are just quick examples of what I do in the inclusive course and what I do in one of my reading and writing courses. And it just talks about before, during, and after. Because at the end of this, my presentation, I'm going to ask you to talk to each other about before, during, and after. So I provide all of my classes a case study student, a hypothetical student with a disability. This student has strengths and weaknesses. And as they if someone were to take me for multiple courses, they will have or see me use this hypothetical student as the anchor for discussions. So if they took me for the reading 1 course in learning how to read, they'll see how my fake student Jean strengths and needs are and how I would help Jean in learning how to read. They take me in part 2, the writing course, Jean comes along with me to the part 2 course. And then now they see how I'm going to work with Jean in helping Jean learn how to write better. So the key is to show them how does a teacher ensure access, participation, and progress for a particular student across different courses in the program. The example of a report or semester-long project would be the wiki report. Instead of writing a traditional term paper, I have them work in groups, and they design an online brochure / report in lieu of the paper. So instead of working by themselves, they work with each other evaluating schools, evaluating how well a school can provide supports for a particular disability category. So each wiki group is a different disability category. So what they're doing in their groups is they're mirroring my hypothetical student. So except everyone else is not using the same disability category. Sometimes they do, but most of the time they don't. So for the after, students incorporate the during class content with a new task that they must accomplish. So let's say, for example, there's a rubric that you have for the semester long project. Let's say for this course, it's the wiki report. If there are 10 rows in this rubric, every week, my during class activity is going to be 1 row of that rubric. I model and demonstrate and use my hypothetical student. They go into their groups, they work on their group student for that week. And then when they leave for the after class session, they work independently on their individual project, which is a semester long project. And a variety of assessments. Then for the reading and writing course, I use the same logic. Some type of case study where they get to see the experiences of the teacher and student working in different classroom conditions on a weekly basis. Then for the assessment that they're using to identify the strengths and weaknesses of the student, I work with them on assessing students, and they rotate. So for example, here are an opportunity for 5 different groups. 1 week, 1 group might be working on phonemic awareness, another group on alphabetic understanding / phonics, or reading fluency, vocabulary, and reading comprehension. I'll do the same thing that I did before. Give them a task or a row of the rubric, and each group completes a part of the whole. So when they present and I give them feedback, they get feedback on the entire project. Then after class, what they do is they look for supportive information, whether it's research journals, websites, reports, to support the evidence-based practices that they claim should work for their student. So those are just 2 quick examples of how I try to do before, during, and after using a semester-long project. There is also before, during, and after for individual assignments or tasks for that week. Now it comes to what would you do? So this is what I'm going to share with everyone. Give me 1 second. Let me stop sharing for a second. In the chat, I'm going to share a link to a Dropbox folder that I have, which has the PowerPoint for this session. It has some documents in there. One of them is the conceptual framework. The other is the Educating All Students framework for the test. And the last would be both a Word and a PDF version of the course alignment table that I use. So let me share that, because this is going to be our group activity. So I'm going to share the document with you first, and then I'll share the instructions in the PowerPoint. And I'm hoping that what I'm sharing here will help you better understand or conceptualize how you want to structure your hybrid course to help you move from in-person to online and back to in-person. So what you see here is a table that I've made. I am going to redesign my courses. So this semester, I'm piloting some things in my courses to see how they go, to give me a better idea how I need to structure my courses. So let me share with you the logic behind this. The logic is to better maximize the transition between in-person and hybrid, whether it's synchronous or asynchronous, I'm using the professional standards in the field to ground my class sessions. And with that, I think about accreditation. So I look at the Council for Exceptional Children standards. If you're in mathematics, it will be the National Center for Teaching Mathematics, right, Laura? Yep. Or NCTE for English, and so on and so forth. Then I also look at, so these are program standards. Then I also look at the individual tests that the students in my program need to take. So they have to take the Educating All Students, the Students with Disabilities, the multi-subject either for grade 7 to 12, and they also have to complete EdTPA. So what I plan to do once I finish this for the courses that I'm going to teach in the fall of 2022, my plan is to have this mapped out for 13 weeks, I would say, 13 or maybe 12 weeks, because the last 2 weeks might be presentations. And there will not necessarily be too many standards for me to do for presentations. But, or however, each table is one unit and you insert the topic here. So, whatever the topic is. So let's say, for example, in the introduction course, let me do this, just to give you an example. My computer's slow. Maybe the topic might be the history and laws in special education and why they must do certain things in their classrooms. The reason why I have week 2 highlighted is because I want you to think about before, which is week 1, during, which is week 2, and then the after, which is going to be the week 3. Each document only has 3 weeks. So there are going to be 5 units. So you should name each unit whatever the goal is for those 3 weeks. So there's an overall goal for these 3 weeks. This one happens to be the history and laws in special education. For this week 2, for the conceptual framework, I went into the proficiencies and I selected 3.1 under educating for and about diversity. Provide individual and/or group needs in the classroom. The belief that all students can learn and treat students with fairness. Then I went into, I'm ignoring the Council for Exceptional Children only for this presentation because it doesn't apply to everyone here. So I deliberately selected educating all students because every student in our programs need to take the EAS. So I selected performance indicator F, which is related to 3.1 in the conceptual framework. It is 18% of the exam, which is diverse student populations. There's another 18% for English language learners, and there's another 18% on the test, which is for students with disabilities. So this is the broader population. So here, the performance indicator that I'm trying to address in that class session would be demonstrates knowledge of strategies using and adapting fair, equitable, and appropriate classroom assessment practices to inform instruction. And see how the connection here treats students with fairness. And then if this were a special ed presentation only, then I'll have a special ed standard here. Then I'll go and look for, is there a standard based on what I'm trying to do for the students with disabilities exam? On the multi-subject, is there anything that I can highlight for them to let them know like this is addressing this aspect or performance indicator on that test? Then on EdTPA for week 2, what can I do for EdTPA for week 2? Then what I do is, or would do, is have a unit goal and then have both a content, let me highlight it like this, both a content and a language objective. The content and language objectives will be based on the standards or performance indicators that I pulled from the certification tests and their professional standards and EdTPA. Then I'll have a plan for struggling students, typical students, and advanced students. So I'm going to try and differentiate the language objectives and the content objectives based on their current knowledge and skills. The goal is by the end of the semester, they all have the minimum knowledge and skills required to pass their exams and a TPA. Now here is the important, well, all of the above is important, but there are two aspects. You can either use for each week, either use this, which is for asynchronous class sessions, or you can use this part, which is for in-person or synchronous class sessions. The reason why I have in-person and synchronous together is because my personal goal and professional goal is to really not have a distinction between synchronous and in-person. Whatever I want to do in person, I want to be able to do it synchronously online as well. So if I wanted to model something, give them a template to fill out in small groups and have them working in small groups and rotate, circulate in the in-person physical environment, and then reconvene, have them share and give them corrective feedback on their presentations. I can also do that in a synchronous environment. So that's why I have them here together like this. Now, when it comes to whether it's activity 1, activity 2, 3, 4, or 5, you can change it to whatever you wish to change it. The goal isn't to have all 5 activities or more than 5 activities every week. The goal of having this type of table is to let you see, am I presenting a balanced view or experience for the students, whether it's online or in person, to the actual content? And are they having sufficient practice with these different types of activities and assessments to give them sufficient feedback to let them know that they need to study harder or seek additional help? So let me stop sharing this and then give you your instructions for your quick discussion that you're going to have with your group. So here are the instructions. We're going to get into small groups, and you're just going to talk for about 15 minutes about using the conceptual framework and the EAS performance indicator, what you see in that table. What would you do for an in-person lesson or activity, as well as a synchronous or an asynchronous class session? So the first thing you're going to do is look at those performance indicators for the conceptual framework for the School of Ed, and then for the EAS, and just say to each other, if we were to design an in-person class session, what would we think about? And then flip it and say to yourself, if it was a hybrid format for that week, whether it's asynchronous or synchronous, how would we address that? What kind of things can we come up with? And as you talk about that, think about before, during, and after. What would we have them do before class in week 1? What would we have them do during the class during week 2, which is primarily prompt number 1? And then what will we do after class to be an extension of that week 2 and in preparation for week 3? The content is open to you. So one group can decide to do science, another group can decide to do art. It doesn't matter. And if you talk about this, or actually come up with something, let us know what your format will be. Would it be 1 in person to every online session every other week? Would it be 2 in person, 1 online, 2 in person, 1 online? What is your format? So these are the 3 things that you need to answer. So the instructions are in the chat. And then what I'm going to do now is I'm going to share the template for anyone who, so that way you don't have to download if you don't at this time. You can download later if you wish. Let me put you into small groups. You have the instructions. Let me try and see if I can paste into the small groups. Okay, to respect everyone's time, let me do this very quickly. Let's have one comment from each group, and then I'll give you the 10 takeaways. And then if there's anyone who wants to express anything else after we close, then I can stay on for a little bit. So who would like to give us one answer to their before, during, and after, or how they conceptualized in-person versus hybrid, synchronous or asynchronous? What were your thoughts?
I'll go quickly and say that the bulk of our conversation was focused on how we chunk and scaffold the experiences.
Whether it's in person or online? Now, was there a seamless transition in terms of going back and forth, or you had difficulty conceptualizing that?
Well, Randy gave us a great example about her inquiry class, where it was very successful going back and forth between in-person and virtual.
Or it would be had I thought that way. But
Randy, would you kindly just tell us very quickly what that was?
yeah, it's a project-based. The whole course is project-based, but this particular project is scaffolded. So students, they write an autobiography. Then they use that autobiography to create either a book or a box. It's called the My Story Project. And there's a lot of things that they have to learn beforehand. So the before is a lot of handouts and demonstrations, etc. During they work on their project, and afterwards, of course, they, for assessment, and afterwards they present it. And there's always a reflection with a rubric, etc. But if you don't work in class all the time, it's very easy to go from one to the other. I'd say that my graduate art class was very successful because of the way it was scaffolded and the way we worked at home and presented, the work each week. Had we been in person or hybrid, it would have worked just as well, is
Okay.
what I think. But you really have to know, what you have to really scaffold well and have everything prepared. And then figuring out how to work best with the students you have for that semester, their strengths and weaknesses, and how it aligns with your own to make the class work.
Let me throw this out there before we go to the next group. When you have a project, semester-long project, transitioning from in-person to online, whether synchronous or asynchronous, is easier. It's harder to do it when you have isolated class sessions. This is why the use of the standards helps you transition from one week to the other, because you can extend on a standard. When you look at the standards actually get more sophisticated as you go through them, but they become extensions of each other. So it helped me transition the isolated tasks that they do for each weekly folder. Okay, the next group. What was the gist for your transitions?
Marty and I talked about how some of the preparation that they did prior to their classes, such as journals or one-pagers, would lead to discussions in the in-person session, or for Marty, it was virtual still. But so that's kind of what the work that they did would prep them for that. And then I followed up with some of the stuff that the group work would lead to later classes, which we're going to see how that works, because that's a work.
Oh, okay. It sounds good. I love the experimenting. It's scary, but it's fun too.
Yeah.
All right.
You're muted, Marty. Marty, you're muted.
Marty.
Okay. My class meets once a week, so it focuses on the student teachers and full-time teachers' experiences outside of the school environment, in the classroom. And so, as Laura mentioned, each week they have to prepare a weekly journal, which they then bring back into the classroom, whether it's on campus or now virtual. discussions, interactions. They have assignments. So it was a pretty smooth transition, when we went to a virtual environment. Most of the things that I've done in the classroom, I've adapted to do virtually. Of course, I'd rather be in the classroom, but even group work, and they do have an ongoing project presentations, which is ongoing, and that's at the end, where they have to do a slide presentation summarizing their the student teaching experience.
And Marty, you say you prefer being in the classroom just because I'm assuming that you like being in person more than virtual?
Well, I mean, the virtual has certain advantages, but you still miss the interactions,
yeah.
walking around the room, etc.
So it's the social nonverbal interactions you're talking about, like the physical, like just the you know what I'm trying to say.
Of course,
I can't get it out.
Face to face,
right? Yeah. What we don't realize we miss when we're online sometimes.
That's true. That's true.
And then our third group.
Yeah, Doris and Leonard and I were talking about a project that is developing in my class. The Practicum Class. The ages taught by our students are all the way from pre-K through high school. So there's a big variation in their experience of teaching. But one thing that we have in common is that we're trying to give them direct experience of inquiry and how to then see how academic work is embedded in an inquiry experience. Let them have that for themselves as a group, and then translate, say, okay, how can I, now that I've done this for myself, how can I do this for my students? So one of our students is a fellow who was a professional musician before he became a high school Spanish teacher. So that at first was going to be, now we know what we're going to do at our final class party, to thinking that we could actually do something together. And so we had a very nice discussion about how we could build this project, including Doris's amazing ideas about how students, when they're online, can improvise at home to make percussion instruments and talk about their own cultural background in terms of music, dance, costumes that go with dance, all kinds of things, and the skills that would go along with that. And then expressing their experience in language, using their own native languages and English. And so they would have the experience for themselves that hopefully then they can build in the project they're designing for their own students. But it would be a question of having them have some time where they're actually together planning in the room, sometime where they're times where they're researching it on their own or through investigating through their own communities, and building an experience, like an authentic experience in the class that can stand as a model for what they can do.
Quick question. Is there a preference for how much of that is done in person versus online with cameras and microphones?
Well, it's not like we're being given a lot of choice about that, but
I mean, ideally, like if, we didn't have the pandemic and that sort of thing.
Okay. I think that it's very valuable to have time in person.
Okay.
And I think that relationships are built in a way that just talking with each other just doesn't happen in the same way online, even though I tried to do a lot to encourage chatting and conversing and connecting, and I see it being easier in person, developing relationships, developing trust.
I agree.
So we were mostly thinking about the School of Education conceptual framework as a guideline.
Okay. All right.
Doris, did I do okay?
You did very well.
Want to add anything else?
Nope, there's
Okay.
nothing to add. Thank you.
All right.
Gotta go.
Yes, yes.
I gotta go.
Yeah, no problem. You have access to the PowerPoint and everything, so
Okay,
no problem. Thank you for
thank
coming.
you so much.
You're
Bye,
welcome.
Jane.
Thank you, Val. I have to head out as well.
All righty, take care. I'll just share the last takeaways. Should take a couple of minutes. Anyone besides Doris? Besides Doris? Doris, you figured this out, right?
Well, the group figured it out.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Well, just whoever is here, just say it. Whoops. How might the what?
Flip.
Yes, exactly.
Flipped classroom.
So if you noticed, as I structured my courses, you can see that I structure it where whether it's in person or online, the after class session is both an extension of the class and a flipped classroom for the upcoming class.
Yeah. So it's like a transition and a connection.
Exactly.
It's a bridge.
Yes.
Definitely a bridge.
So here are my 10 takeaways, and I know we're over, but I'll go quickly.
We're fine.
Okay. So start small, incrementally increase student demands over time. But as I present these takeaways, even though I'm focusing on the student, it's also focusing on you, meaning you also need to start small incrementally in terms of how you plan and design. Help students develop good study skills. They need the structure and they need the deadlines. If you give them too much wiggle room, they will not know what to do with it essentially as a whole. Some of them are very organized. They have no problem. Others, without the structure and the reminders, they fall apart in the online environment. Align before class with during class materials and activities. From my experience, the use of the professional standards helps me to transition from one class to the other. And it helps me to go deeper with the standards as opposed to always rehashing or reiterating a standard that I covered already. Just like students, instructors also are more comfortable with certain areas. They tend to talk about certain areas more if they're not acutely aware of that. So assess, every during and every after class. I have quizzes, I have practice quizzes, I have exams, and that's one of the ways that I give them deadlines and structure, because they tend to hide in the online environment by turning their cameras off, thinking that, oh, if I don't read, I just turn my camera off, he won't call on me. But in class, they feel like you might call on them in class. Vary your interactions and activities over time. In the beginning, stick with what you know and you feel comfortable with. Don't think of it as being a repetition for the students. They also like knowing what they are going to be doing. But what you need to do is, like, for every 2 times you do something, for the 3rd time, add something new or add something different. So during class, I always provide immediate corrective feedback. I think of yourself as a basketball coach. If someone shoots the foul shot incorrectly, you need to correct them right away so they can practice it the right way. Since I'm trying to partially flip my courses for every class session, I need them to come into class knowing what they were supposed to know, but they need to practice it the right way. Otherwise, the whole purpose of flipping the class is not worth it. So individual and collaborative work. I try to emphasize the engagement part and the social aspect in the online environment, but they also need to work individually, because some students, if they're not as strong as others, tend to rely on the classmates too much. And you don't want other classmates to start resenting the collaborative work. Always try to embed options to try and remove the barriers. So this goes back to me saying, okay, you need to have a plan for the struggling learner. You need to have the plan for the typical learner and a plan for the advanced learner. They're already certified. Then maybe you need to have them do less work on lesson planning and do something on extension activities or something of that nature. So efficiency in your design is key. Trying to make sure that what you do is durable and they can actually use it. In the beginning, I found myself putting things up into the folders that I wasn't even sure if they would really need to use it. You know, an extra article or an extra video. And I would question myself, like, why do I have an extra video? Why do I have an extra article? So whatever you do, it needs to have an efficient and durable purpose in your design. Less is more. And last, just make it fun, you know, and try to make the content fun. And don't focus on the technology. The technology is not what makes the hybrid course a hybrid course. It's what you do in terms of the process and the content that makes the course a hybrid course. Whatever you do in person, you can most likely do in the virtual environment, except like what Marty had expressed, and I also agree on. There are certain social cues you can't get in the online environment that you can get in person.
Yeah.
And that is it.